So now we'll move to Ian Dunt. Ian, as you know, is a very well-known figure who writes for a variety of newspapers and magazines. He appears regularly on TV and radio. He's the editor of politics.co.uk, as well as a host on the Remainiacs podcast. Anyone who follows Ian on Twitter will remember how he became our point of reference for understanding what was going on as the withdrawal agreement went through the Parliament, and his informative and often irreverent commentary on the day-to-day events were a lifeline for many of us who were struggling to make sense of what was going on in the UK. Ian is the author of 2 books. The first, Brexit, What the Hell Happens Now? We still don't know the answer to that one. But the one I'm reading at the moment, How to Be a Liberal, which is published by Canterbury Press, is the story of the values that underpin Western civilization and how these are being undermined by nationalism and identity politics. I really recommend it to everybody. It's a great read. So, okay, over to you, Ian, then. Thank you very much.
No, thank you. Okay, I mean, look, Brexit is about borders. It's been about borders from the very beginning. When we were told take back control, that was essentially a statement about borders on sovereignty. It was to say that we're done sharing sovereignty, that countries are no longer going to work together under our eyes in order to solve problems that they're unable to do on their own. The things that we are seeing now in Kent, the preparations, whether there is a deal or no deal, the lorry parks, the customs declarations, the bureaucratic requirements, the safety and security documentation, the countless IT systems at ports and on ferries and on lorries. That is the site of the reintroduction of borders to a continent that had learned how to eradicate them, that had gained itself the supreme luxury of not having to operate with this kind of endless bureaucracy. But the borders that Brexit entailed also were inflicted on people. Anyone who is an immigrant or who comes from an immigrant family knows that immigrants live in more than one place at the same time. Very, very rarely you find an immigrant who so embraces the country that they've moved to that they completely forget about the one that they came from. And even more rarely than that, you'll meet one who has really hardened themselves against the country that they've moved to and really yearns only and exclusively for the country they came from. But these are vanishingly rare events. Immigrants live a life of the place that they are and the place that they're from, and usually very many other countries as well. And that is not a form of identity that is binary. That is a form of identity that is liquid, that shifts, that changes, that defines them. They are many things at once, not just one thing at once. And they can sit and think that I am a Londoner, and I am English, and I am British, and I am European, and I am French, and none of these things are exclusive to the other. When Brexit happened, a border came down on people who live their lives in that way and who think in that way. The main moment for that, for me anyway, was Theresa May's speech, her first conference speech after the vote, when she said, and it's a line that we all know well now, none of us should have to know it, but we do all know it. If you're a citizen of the world, you're a citizen of nowhere. Now, we knew what that meant politically, right? We knew who she was talking to. We knew that that signified that nativism, that nationalism was now entrenching itself in Downing Street. But it wasn't just the strategic politics of it. It was that she was saying to people who had the capacity for multiple identities, who had diversity in their sense of who they were, no, you're going to be one thing now. And coming from the Prime Minister, that was, I mean, one of the most dispiriting speeches I had ever heard, and that I never believed I would hear such a thing from a British Prime Minister. I spoke to a European, Jacob, not so long ago, actually, who was Polish, and he came to the UK when he was 12 years old. It's quite old, you know, he was now just sort of leaving university. And he hadn't had a particularly rough time of it. He'd gone back to Poland for a few months after uni. He was in Britain when the vote came in. And he said the thing that struck him about the vote was that he was sort of shifting around in his identity. He felt quite English actually after a while. And then he started to feel a bit more Polish and go back to the country. And suddenly people came along and just said, no, you decide now. You're one thing or the other. You make a call, a border across the human heart. Now, his experience is on the much more gentle end of things. There are people who had much more terrible, much more pernicious effects on them. The people who received letters from the Home Office telling them that they had to leave completely wrongly. Homeless people picked up, people even sent to detention centres in some cases. But more broadly than that, there was this sense of Europeans being the other, of being a problem to be solved at best, of being bargaining chips. For all Europeans in this country, there was a period of over a year, of 18 months, where they were asking what the status would be. They were asking for security about the place that they called home, about their place with their neighbours and their friends, and many of them had never even dreamed that anyone would ever threaten. And that security was not given. So months later, when Theresa May came out and said, we're going to guarantee the status, we value what you bring to our country, it was demonstrably false that she valued anything about the European contribution to this country, because if she had valued it, she would never have put Europeans in the situation where for 18 months, they didn't know where they were, they didn't know what their status would be. Europeans were talked about like a problem to be solved, like an other. And they weren't talked to, and they weren't heard from. They were talked about, and they were talked over. So the reason that I felt flattered when In Limbo came and asked if I would do a foreword, and it was my privilege to write it, was because it's a document that will show you the lives of Europeans living in this country and what they went through, the humanity that was involved in a bunch of newspaper headlines that spoke over them and talked about them and treated them as a problem, and the connections that they made with each other and the support that they showed with each other. And those stories matter in a way that is much greater than the events which they concern. They are the provision of the human, of a complex human with multiple identities and multiple loyalties and associations in a world that hasn't been imposed on them in black and white, in bureaucratic, technical language. So it was a privilege to write it, but it was also a privilege over the last few years when there has been very, very few good things to point out about what we've been going through, to be even tangentially and in a minor way in contact with the Europeans in Britain and the Brits in Europe who formed links with each other, who worked together, who supported each other, who showed solidarity to one another, who backed each other against governments that treated them like a problem. And although there have been very few good things about the last few years, one of the great privileges was seeing people of really true dignity and sincerity behave that way and show each other that kind of solidarity and support. And for that reason, it was a privilege to do the foreword. It was a privilege to work with people and to continue working with them in that kind of endeavor. And it's a privilege to be here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Your words are always an inspiration to us. And